There are millions of acres of opportunity out there. They belong to you. Every day, decisions are being made that affect your land, your water, your wildlife. You should know about them. This is your mountain. Hey, welcome everybody to the Your Mountain podcast. We are back in 2019. We've been gone for a couple weeks.
We've been here. It's been wonderful.
Mm-hmm. But we decided to have Christmas and New Year's.
I think our families kind of mandated that we take a
it was a good
2-week hiatus. Yeah. So what did you do with your newfound free time there?
We stayed here in town, and family came into town, which was good because my youngest was born in December, and so we had to have a family birthday party. And then my parents turned 70 this year, so we had to have a special birthday for them. And so, because my dad's a Christmas Eve baby, so we had to have a special Christmas or a special birthday party for him.
So does he think that that's the best time of year? That like the best day to have a birthday, or just about the worst day to have a birthday?
I don't know, because on that side of the family, they celebrated Christmas Eve, and so like everybody opened presents, everybody got together on Christmas Eve. So I don't know that he ever had his own birthday. But I'm born on my sister's birthday, and so
she's born on your birthday.
That's good planning. That's good planning by your parents.
She got to have two birthdays before.
Okay.
So I've never had my own. I don't know what it's like, but I just know that when I was born,
it's a real letdown, Mike.
They brought me to my sister, and she's like, "Take it back."
And she's been saying it ever since. Right. How about you, Nephi? What'd you do for over your holiday?
We had family, both mine and my wife's family, and I did lots of cooking on the smoker, and I'm just the happiest kid ever. I smoked some turkeys, smoked a bunch of different kinds of beef, made the biggest brisket I've ever made in my entire life. I couldn't even believe it came off of a cow. It looked like some kind of mutant animal must have come off, but
I'm a little disappointed in just learning about this. I wasn't invited over.
I also was not invited to
I was eating brisket sandwiches for like a week straight after.
I don't like turkey. I would love to have come over for brisket.
Man, the smoked turkey was amazing. I brined it for 24 hours plus before. It's very simple brine, very easy to do. And then put that thing on the smoker, and it was just like, it was way better than, it's so much better than just like a standard
I know.
turkey.
I like smoked turkey. That's good.
No,
but I just don't want a week and a half of leftovers.
Yeah, and then you had to try and smoke cheese. And, of course, you have to throw some pie in there and see what happens with that. Just anything you could try and smoke. That was my goal over the break. It's just, in the smoker. Let's clarify that.
Right, yeah.
In the smoker, try and smoke everything in the smoker. That was the goal.
I made a bunch of jerky.
Uh-huh.
A lot of goose jerky. And I think I've told you guys this before. I'm struggling to come up with ways to prepare goose.
Mm-hmm.
Once you have last year I had an elk's worth of goose meat.
So what many people do is they give it away to their friends to share the wealth.
Yeah.
And because
Dave's trying to figure out how to. He just wants to. He's making a mattress.
I'm hoarding for the apocalypse.
You're doing it right there.
Can we sleep on this? How many years?
Well, the thing is, you never know when you're going to need a lot of food to get by. When maybe there's not a paycheck coming in or something. Hey, you see what I
nice
did there?
Segue there.
Hey, yeah, right. So, the beauty about all of your vacations and holidays is, it was just that.
Unless you work for the federal government.
Yeah.
In which case you may still be on vacation.
That's what I was going to say is you guys
lucky dogs
are heading back to work, right? But not everybody is so fortunate to be heading back to work and collecting a paycheck right now.
No, I say lucky dogs facetiously.
Yeah. We wanted to talk about the government shutdown today. And let's be honest, everybody listening knows that there's at least a partial government shutdown going on, and they've heard all the stories, and they've heard, generally speaking, why there's this fight over continuing the funding of the government.
They've heard
right?
the posturing of both sides.
Right. They've heard it all.
Sure.
You know,
It's on the news. Absolutely.
Yeah, but some of the details are missing sometimes, right?
Well,
you hear
yeah,
the high level stuff,
Right, and then how it impacts sportsmen.
right?
I mean, you don't hear that on CNN or NPR.
Not much, not a lot about it,
No.
and so that's what we want to talk a little bit about. We want to run through in the time we've got today. We want to run through the shutdown. We would talk about on December 21st of 2018. At least, and Nephi, you'll want to. I know you've got this information in front of you, but a number of federal agencies ran out of money because Congress did not appropriate funds to continue operations of those agencies. And that's why we're calling it a partial government shutdown, because some agencies are still funded.
Yeah, so it depends on what department you were in. So the executive departments, there are 15 executive departments. 9 of the 15 are impacted. So for those of you who are keeping score, that means if you care about agriculture, commerce, homeland security, housing and urban development, interior department, which we'll talk about more, justice, the State Department, transportation, or treasury, you care about this. Those departments that are unaffected are defense, education, energy, health and human services, labor, and veterans affairs. So you have this
and they're
split.
they're unaffected. Those last ones are unaffected because they were Congress funded them earlier in 2018.
That's right. And then you also have this complex thing that we always talk about, which is the different pots of money that you have. You have those spending that's mandatory, and so the federal government, and I'll try and make this quick, spends $4.4 trillion is what the federal budget is, but that's not the end of the game. And so of that $4.4 trillion, you have $3.1 trillion that was what we call mandatory spending. Nobody has to decide about that. That's just going to happen.
And let's really quickly, some of that mandatory spending. So mandatory spending is like, we have a law that tells us we have to do this, right? So we have things like Social Security, things like Medicaid, Medicare, and our
Some of those things are
debt obligations of the country.
Right, yeah, or pass-through obligations where we're taxed for a specific purpose and then goes in a specific pot, and then that gets for the intended beneficiaries. Whereas we're talking about discretionary spending, which is more where Congress gets to kind of decide what they want to do and change things.
They can bring home the bacon there.
That's right.
Right? That's part of discretionary spending, right? It's but that's where there's flexibility with Congress to decide what we're going to spend money on and how. Yeah.
And a lot of the times, the things that we hear people argue about, they're in this pot. So, for example, we all love LWCF. So when we're talking about that appropriation project, we're talking about the appropriations. We're talking about this area here. So how much we're actually going to appropriate. So going back now to talk about discretionary. It's $1.3 trillion is the discretionary spending. Right now, $1 trillion of that is unimpacted by this. So about 23% of the budget. So what's left?
Now, hang on. Why? Is that because that
already
trillion
been
has
done.
already been done for these other agencies that have been funded?
That's when we're talking about that. So agencies where they've already been taken care of through a different process. Those aren't the ones that are still hanging out there. Those are those other. We talked about the 9 and 15 that are impacted. That's the other 6. They're taken care of.
I'm counting yours. Sorry to sidetrack. Is it 9 or 8? I might be missing one. That are
Ag, commerce, Homeland Security, HUD, Interior, Justice, Transportation, Treasury, State.
Oh, State. I didn't have that one down. All right. Okay. I just want to make sure we had it right.
Yeah.
All right. And I'm hoping I have it right, too.
I think you do.
I've got my notes, and so there you go.
My notes were wrong.
I'm going to get 90% on this quiz if I'm wrong on that. And hey, that's okay, everybody. I'm sorry. But so you also have so left over, we have 7% of the budget total is what's left over,
which is about $300 billion.
$300 billion, and of that $300 billion, that's where our fight centers around $5 billion within that $300 billion.
Yeah, let's be fair. It's like 5.6.
Well, somebody it was 1.3.
I know.
It's a range.
It's in a range. Yeah, but the fight is over
a nebulous thing, and it's a nebulous amount, and
it's over. It's a border security.
Yes, it's
fight.
Border security. And there's a lot of discussion. I mean, for those people that understand, hey, words matter, right? And so you have, a lot of it. Quite frankly, we're probably arguing in some cases over vocabulary, because we probably are, in some cases we're getting the same things, just what somebody wants to call something. It's really, it's a difficult issue to deal with, and it's one that's fraught with political issues right now, because it represents promises on both sides of the political spectrum. That's what we're really arguing over.
No, that's exactly right. So we're fighting over $5 billion. So I mean, that begs the question of why can't we fund the rest of it and kick the fight on the $5 billion down the road?
And there's a proposal that's been made.
Right.
Right.
In fact, that proposal was agreed to by both the House and the Senate, but over the threat of veto.
And the problem is,
it didn't go anywhere.
But it's called leverage.
That's exactly right. The problem is, once if you're like, hey, you know what? Let's just take care of everything that we agree on. We're going to leave this last thing. And the problem is, if you think that you have the leverage to get your thing done or to keep it from getting done, as soon as you let go of your leverage, you lose your bargaining power.
The big question here is, and it's the unanswerable question for us, is who really thinks everybody, both sides think they have the leverage with this, right? Yeah. Who really has the leverage? I guess we'll find out.
Yeah, and
I think that'll play out in 2020.
Yeah.
Who had the leverage here?
It also brings us to the human element of the shutdown, which is that you've got 800,000 people who are not working. Right?
Well, except 800,000 people who are not being paid.
You're correct.
So 800,000 people that are furloughed.
Yep. So the furlough affects 800,000 federal employees. So almost 1 million federal employees. Now, those federal employees are broken into 3 different categories.
And don't forget, it also, in addition to that, there are tens of thousands of government contractors that aren't getting paid as well.
Yeah, because the federal government, you're basically not spending money. However, Mike, what was the name of the act?
Anti-Deficiency Act?
The Anti-Deficiency Act. And this thing is, how old is this, Mike?
That's why you keep me around. Oh, I don't know that.
It's like a vault. Yeah. A vault. It's seen lots of books. Yeah. It's old. And so, for example...
almost as old as Mike.
Yeah, I mean, it's like... I think it's Civil War age. I mean, you talk about...
So almost as old as Mike.
Yeah, right.
So you're talking about if there was something that there's an expectation the federal government would be doing something, that they can do that. And they can, they just can't pay for it, but they can still do it. They're allowed to do that. So, for example, if you were a cavalry officer and you had to get horse feed or the horses all die, guess what? You're going to be able to get horse feed no matter what. So that is, going back to the 1800s, now bring it forward to today. That brings us into these different classes of employees and how they're treated differently within the federal system. And I say employees, again, these are people that, nobody's getting paid right now, even if they're working.
So and a lot of them are working.
420,000. 420,000 are working. They're what we call...
Of that 800,000.
Yes.
Right. So I think it's better to classify it as the 800,000 or so are those impacted because they are employed by the agencies that don't have funding.
That's right.
And so there's a small segment of that is... or about half of that are furloughed. In other words, they're home without pay. Yeah. And then the other half are working without pay.
Yeah, and those that are working without pay, they are called accepted. And that means they do a critical function that if they go away, something terrible is going to happen. So, for example, if your job is to chase geese off of a runway, at LaGuardia, you're a federal employee that's not getting paid, but you better still be out there chasing those geese off the runway, because if you're not, there's something terrible that could happen, you're out there working for free.
And the best example, really, one of the best, is Homeland Security,
right?
And your TSA folks. So if you're traveling for the holidays, if you traveled for the holidays and you went through security at any airport, every single one of those employees working there,
right? So you're talking about
pay.
Homeland Security. We think 13% of that agency is furloughed, meaning that the other portion are continuing to work because they're an essential. Mm-hmm. Nephi's description of wildlife services, that's under Department of Agriculture, right?
Yeah, it's a much smaller segment of those guys that are accepted.
Yeah,
that
so
are
the
still
Department
working.
of Agriculture, about 38% of those folks are furloughed, so they're not showing up and they're not getting paid, as opposed to the other balance that are just not getting paid.
And then you have,
but they're working.
And
before we started this, you were saying like housing and urban development.
Yeah. Housing or development, like 95% are furloughed.
Yeah.
So only 5% are continuing to work on those issues, which is sort of staggering. But
Yeah.
that's by far the most impacted agency as far as not working, not showing up to work.
Homeland Security.
No, housing and urban development.
HUD, 95% are furloughed.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Homeland Security has the least amount furloughed.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
There's a lot of numbers that we're not
there's-
going to get right.
Yeah, we're just
Anyways.
tossing a lot of stuff
So-
out there. But
When the agencies shut down, there's other employees, just for note, there's a lot of these federal employees are what we call on call still. So there are people that are sitting by that are or have their computers and are checking in. And then there are people that literally you are not allowed to turn your computer on. You're not allowed to turn your cell phone on. Nothing. You're absolutely instructed. Those are the true
yes,
furloughed.
You cannot do
You are
anything.
prohibited by law from doing anything.
Yep.
So
And being prohibited by law from doing your job in some of these agencies that say the sportsman's community depends on actually has some impacts.
well, and as opposed to we talked about it. There are areas where as opposed to people being angry that they're being made to come to work and not getting paid, there are people who are angry that they can't come work for free because they feel so powerfully about their jobs because
Right.
they feel so. I mean, a lot of these agencies that we care about in interior, in agriculture, the people that work for those agencies, sometimes it's not just a job to them; it's something that they're passionate about.
Right.
Yeah. So we are, like I said, December 21st was shutdown day. And we are now, at the release of this podcast, January 8th, 17 days into the federal government, partial federal government shutdown. And we want to talk a little bit about, okay, as this drags on, and to be quite honest, I mean, we're all speculating like everybody else is about how long this could drag on. It's very possible that we could be watching the president give the State of the Union address to a partially shut down Congress, or not Congress, partially shut down government, right? And that, I think that's scheduled the end of January. This could go on for a while.
Yeah, so
And-
everybody knows there's been since 1976 there have been 21 shutdowns. The longest shutdown since 76 was the 1995.
Let's call it the Gingrich
Clinton.
Clinton showdown.
Yeah, the Gingrich Clinton showdown lasted 21 days. And that one's, 4 days longer than the nearest. And most of them lasted less than a week. And then a number of them were in that teens category. And that's the only one that was 20 days plus, and it was 21 days since the 70s.
And it is, you'd mentioned something before we started recording this, and it's worth mentioning it before one last time, or not one last time, for a first time to the folks listening, before we really dive into these specific agencies and the impact. But we've had government shutdowns, that we were looking at back into the Carter administration. And so we're talking going back 40 plus years, and we're talking about situations where you had a Democratic House, Democratic Senate, Democratic presidency. We're talking situations where you've had an entire
DDD, RRR,
DRD,
I mean,
you
it's
name
like
it. The
they're
alphabet soup.
totally agnostic, and so
it
it's
doesn't
been,
matter. There's a political issue at the time. In
Yep.
this instance, it's the border security fight.
Yes, it hasn't been
in the
unique
past, it's
to any
been-
one party
Yeah.
or any one time period or any one president or any one ideology.
There's been an issue, the one with
It happens.
Clinton and Gingrich that was related to deficit spending, I believe.
Yeah.
And how do we get our
Deficit
deficit
under
under control?
Yeah.
And so it was like we talked about earlier. It was
Well, some of them are
using this for
interesting because when
leverage.
you look at some of them, we don't have that historical context that the three of us don't of like the late 70s. You're like, well, what were they fighting about then? And so, but it's happened before.
Yeah,
Yep.
it comes down to some issue comes up, and when you get the power of the purse, that tends to be where you can consolidate fights.
And I have to say one more thing too, and this is just, and you can correct me if you want to on this, but this has kind of bothered me in the way the media has reported on this shutdown. And we're going to take the border security fight piece out of this. It's this whole idea of the blame game of which party is responsible for the shutdown. And both are blaming either each other, but one consistent blame I see is Well, Republicans had control of the House, the Senate, and the presidency, and so they had the executive and legislative branches. And so this is their fight. If they wanted to fund the government, they could have passed a funding bill to fund the government. And the one piece of that I feel gets glossed over and over again is, sure, the House could pass a bill, right? And they did.
Mm-hmm.
The House could pass a bill. The president could sign. If the Senate were to pass the similar bill, they reconcile things, whatever, and put it to the president's desk, sign it. But on the Senate side,
Yep.
you need 60 votes.
Yeah, so
And-
what happened is you had a
so
bill.
you need 9 Democrats.
Yep,
And
so you
it wasn't going to happen.
Yeah, you had a bill come out of the House that the president was great with, but when it got to the Senate, you had the Senate say, well, we can't pass this bill, so they had to make some changes. And then the president said, well, I can't sign that one.
So I just want to point out it's a bipartisan shutdown because you can correct me if you think I'm wrong about that, but that's bothered me about some of the reporting out of this, is saying, well, the Republicans could have just dealt with it if they wanted to deal with it. If they wanted to pass something, they could have passed something. Not true. It was going to take
that's
a
an overly
bipartisan.
simplistic.
It was very simplistic, and I know that's a big tangent, and we're diving in. That makes me dive into the politics side of this a little bit more than I wanted to, but that's just been kind of grating on me as I've watched the reports coming out of this. And I'm not casting blame on anybody. I just think that's unfair reporting. It's not telling the whole story.
And that's why it's imperative that everybody, listeners, take a step back and look in depth at this and try and understand it. So now you have, now the problem is deteriorated to where it is a question of leverage now. It's a question of, it's when is this going to end? It's going to end when somebody thinks that they're going to get in more trouble than the other guy. And so now it's a question of who can endure the most pain to endure the most blame.
Well, let's talk a little bit about some of the things that are going on during the shutdown that might lead to that pain for the American public to speak up.
So first place to start, right? National parks.
Right.
Absolutely seems like the first place to start. National parks are affected by this shutdown. And as we're talking about this, let's put it in some context so that some of the national parks have been shut down completely, but the overwhelming majority of parks are still available for the public to access and utilize.
In most cases, what they're doing is they're saying if there's a public access where you could access, whether it's Forest Service or BLM or Fish and Wildlife or a national park, if it's not the concept is if the public can drive through that location and access that location without having to have somebody on hand to do something for them, then they get to access. So, for example, a campground, right? If you can go to a campground and set up your tent and camp, then you can still go to a campground and set up your tent and camp. What you don't get is services.
Right. But before we talk about that piece, the one thing I was wanting to mention is this has happened before. So this administration is handling it slightly differently than the prior administration.
Mm-hmm.
So under the Obama administration, we had a relatively long shutdown of almost 2 weeks.
Yeah.
I think it was
13 days.
During the Obama administration. And during that time,
16 days.
Yeah. So right about this same duration that we are right as we're talking today. During that shutdown, the Obama administration made the decision to close all national parks and I believe all national wildlife refuges to public and national monuments, to public access. So you couldn't use them in any way, shape, or form. This administration has made a slightly different decision and has allowed, as Nephi pointed out, the type of access that is allowed here. And there were consequences to both decisions. So during the Obama administration, one of the consequences to shutting down were the bedroom communities that depend from an economic standpoint on the revenue derived from visitors coming to those parks. They took a big haircut. They took a big economic hit by those parks being shut down. So this time, the parks remain open, so these bedroom communities that depend on this tourist economy can still derive revenue. But the consequence then on this side
is in that national park, the restroom is not open. It is locked, and there's nobody there to pick up the trash.
The restroom's not, and there's nobody to pick up the trash. And that sounds like a simple thing. Hey, pack it in, pack it out. right? You hear that all the time. You're taught that as a kid. Pack it in, pack it out.
And I think
right?
all three of us are used to that.
Well, you were just down at a national park, and
I was.
What did you see? Did people pack it in, pack it out?
So what I will say.
If it had value, they packed it back out.
I would say, the example that I would provide isn't similar to what some of the reports I've seen out of Yosemite and Joshua Tree and some of those more heavily utilized parks in California, for example. But what I did see is bathrooms were locked, vehicles. You had parking areas for trails. People weren't. Once that was full, people were driving, pulling off the road, damaging resources to park wherever they could along the path because people were still coming in there to use it, and to hike, and people were kind of wandering wherever they wanted to wander, and the trash. So I will say I didn't see a real significant trash issues in the park I was in, but I've, like you have both, probably seen pictures from other parks,
right,
where it's a pretty significant issue.
Sure. High use areas.
Yep,
Yeah.
the higher use areas.
Areas that are where people, areas that they've made areas that we have sold people on. You need to come to this gem of a location. People still want to come to that location.
Right.
Still can in many cases. They're going to see the higher impact because the people are still coming, but you don't have the land managers there to help out.
And
Whereas if it's some place that nobody goes to anyway, which there are plenty of places on our list that nobody's noticed that the ranger isn't there.
But in the higher use areas, and maybe even in the lower use areas too, just where there's use in general, one thing it's a fascinating human observation. We talk a lot about, especially you hear it from the Republican side or the Libertarian side, saying get government out of our lives, right? We need to cut regulatory red tape, so forth. What something like this tells me is there are appropriate places for government to have some regulation and some oversight, and having some control over how and when some of these more highly used landscapes are used. There's some value to that, because when the regulatory framework breaks, which in this system like this furlough, it essentially has, because there's no personnel out there. There's nobody enforcing anything. So it's sort of this. It's this free for all, this self-trust or buddy system. I don't know.
Yeah.
We've got
Hobbes and Locke, right?
Yeah.
What will people do?
Yeah, we build
in the absence of government. But so why don't we talk a little bit about explain what if a listener was going to go out and they were going to encounter a particular space, what are they going to expect to see? Because we talked about impacts on enforcement, trash, maintenance, things like that. So what exactly are we expecting is still going on out there?
So I think it's important to tell everybody. So if anybody thinks that you're going to be able to just roll into Old Faithful and hang out, at the Yellowstone Lodge, things that are still happening are law enforcement.
Some law enforcement.
Law enforcement is in general accepted.
Yeah.
So those are the folks. Now, if you have, so that's just in general law enforcement.
Okay.
Activities necessary to protect life and property that aren't otherwise exempt. Necessary functions to oversee those activities, like IT services, emergency response services, inspection and enforcement on things like if pipeline or natural gas or things like that. Those are the types of things that are continued. Again,
but
this concept from think back to the Civil War and things like, hey, these things have to be done or else the horses die.
But now let's talk about the reality of what that actually means,
right.
because that all sounds great, but here's what actually happens on the ground. So I spent the whole day in this national park. I saw one ranger. The whole day, right? One ranger, no other staff of any kind. From an emergency services standpoint, the way that I understand it works, and in fact, this is what happened, and I can't remember which park it was in. I think it was in, is it Big Sur? Big Bend. Sorry, Big Bend National Park. There was a hiker in there that broke his leg. During this shutdown, a couple miles back in on a trail, and folks that were also on the trail were helping him, and they called dispatch or somebody, and a Park Service person was able to come out, probably under that provision you're talking about, Nephi, to come out and help get this person out safely, right? To help this person. But you don't have, if you think about your experience as a national park, where you see a lot of park rangers and volunteers and
folks that don't have a badge and a gun.
There are very
That's right.
few badges out
Non-LE.
there. There are very few badges out there relative to other personnel in these parks.
Yeah.
And so it largely feels, and I'm just speaking from my personal experience, it largely feels devoid of any government influence or oversight when you're there.
It's almost like BLM land.
It felt like BLM land, right?
Yeah.
Which I think is worth talking about too, because there will be impacts with BLM land too, right? Different type than you'd have with the National Park Service. And I know, Mike, you and I were talking about it before. We were all talking a little bit about it before we did this cast. You had some thoughts on some of the issues that might come up on BLM.
Oh, yeah, well, certainly. Nephi gave sort of the recitation on what they can continue to do, but there's a whole host of things that happens on BLM land that folks want to happen, but they just have nobody they can get in touch with. So, for example, think about permitting for oil and gas. They have to get a permit and they have to get permission to do a lot of things. It's not just applications for permits to drill and that. It's addition to notice of staking and these other things that they have to go out and do in order to take activities. And if there's not a person there to let them go do that, then that has significant economic consequences for your industry, right?
Yeah, and it bleeds over into the recreation industry too, right? Special use permitting.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have a special use permit, whether you want to go, whether you're a guy with a camera crew who's going to shoot a TV show, or whether you're an outfitter, those things are going to be treated differently. If you had your permit in place already, and it doesn't require anybody to check up on you, you get to keep doing what you were doing. If you need a new permit, you're going to wait until this is done, and nothing's getting processed. If you put it in right before this, you're going to be waiting.
Like if you're a public land, if you have an allotment to graze on public land and that permit's coming due now, and you got to get that stuff going in there, nothing's going to happen on that. And then when the government does open up, even when it does open up, there's going to be a backlog. There's going to be a lag period before they can get to any of this stuff that comes in that gap.
And there's some of those recreational permits that are hard to get that this might affect.
Yeah, so if you have a favorite TV show out there,
sorry,
that could be, that could be impacted.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
There's a potential that could be impacted.
Well, I was thinking about river trips. Things that like you might be waiting in line for something that you might not get a chance to do again because
you're absolutely right. Yeah, getting that permit to go down the Grand Canyon.
Yeah,
it's that time of year where everybody's putting
in, and we can't. Sitting around this table, we can't accurately and actually say we know exactly how the agencies are going to deal with each of these situations. What we can say is it's complex, and each of these agencies has to figure this out.
Well, and they do. And let me circle back really quickly again, because there's one number I wanted to throw out there with the National Park Service. I forgot to do it. One thing that's happening right now is they're not collecting daily fees from people coming into the park. So what does that mean? Well, right now it's about a $400,000 a day loss to the National Park Service.
It means free camping, everyone.
Yeah, free camping, free hiking, free access. It's your free park month.
Yeah,
right?
It is. Welcome to the tragedy of the commons, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, Garrett Hardin would be pleased at this social experiment that's going on right now.
Yeah.
But actually, I would say in the park that I was in there, they actually did have a little bin saying, "Hey, please deposit your fees here."
A lot of people lined up.
You know how many people I saw deposit their fees in the time I was in that park? Exactly 0.
Your arms got too short.
And I say I couldn't reach my wallet. Yeah, I say exactly 0 because I didn't do that, but I have an annual park pass.
So you got to walk up and
I have an annual park pass.
You got to show
I showed the bin. That was like,
pass.
See, I have a pass. I should be good.
Well, thank you, Dave.
As long as it didn't talk back to you.
It didn't talk back. Yeah.
Just get a receipt.
But there are other agencies that you wouldn't think about necessarily. So Forest Service, the issues with Forest Service and BLM are going to be fairly similar.
Yeah.
But what about there are a couple of other agencies that I think are worth touching on if you're an outdoor recreationist.
Yeah, not the ones that we encounter day to day. Not the guy at
Right.
the front of the counter, the person behind the counter.
Exactly.
Or
So
in the back.
So think about Department of Justice. You might look at Department of Justice and think, well, how does that affect me as a hunter or an outdoor recreationist, right? Well, for example, this is one minor example, but right now there's an appeal on a grizzly bear delisting, right? So if Fish and Wildlife Service wanted to delist bears, a Montana district court said, that the rule violated the Endangered Species Act and it had some deficiencies, and the Fish and Wildlife Service has filed its notice of intent to appeal that to the Ninth Circuit. The Ninth Circuit has set a briefing schedule, but now everything's kind of on hold,
Right.
because the civil side, the DOJ has a civil side and a criminal side. The criminal side would fall into the category Nephi was talking about, of these employees that are working but not getting paid. TJ.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
Our
because
buddy TJ.
you got to remember there are, when you're dealing on the criminal side of things, folks have constitutional rights, speedy trial, and a whole host of things that they are entitled to, and so those things have to continue on. I know, for example, in Wyoming, the court on its own issued an order that said, okay, if there's a case out there and you have a civil attorney from the United States involved, we're just going to stay that case, and then when the shutdown is over, then we'll just reevaluate everything. And then a whole bunch of courts around the nation have done similar things. So, while the criminal side's still going, a lot of this civil stuff that involves many of the forms of litigation and things we've talked about over the last 6 or 7 months, they're on hold right now.
And here's a big one. And this is outside of DOJ, but here's a big one that just sort of popped into my mind. If this shutdown goes on, let's just say, President Trump has suggested that it could, and it might just be hyperbolic rhetoric, but that this could last, to the next, to the 2020 election, to the primaries or something like that, right? Let's just play that out and say, what happens if that does? What does that mean? Well, if you hunt ducks or geese, for example, you have your state set the seasons, but they're based off of the Migratory Bird Treaty Act and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Everything's tiered off of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service taking an action on migratory birds and
writing a rule for that year.
Writing a rule for that year on
creating a stamp.
You got it.
All that stuff.
And so if you hunt those, that begs the question of how will if the Fish and Wildlife Service shut down, how will they get that stuff done to allow for migratory bird hunting?
Well, I think you make a good point, because those are the kinds of things not being looked at, not being worked on right now, because that's not the essential type function that needs to occur. I mean, the folks that are doing the research, that are looking at Endangered Species Act, petitions to list and things like that, and they're running through all of the science and all that. Those folks aren't there to do those kinds of functions. A lot of research is just not occurring.
Well, so then what happens when the government does ultimately reopen for business?
They got to get through a backlog,
right?
Pretty significant one. I mean, by the day.
There's a lot.
I mean, it's not like you just the funding reappears. You come in the next day and you're right back to business as usual. You pick up right where you left off. Maybe you pick up where you left off, but you might have left off 3 months ago.
Well,
and now you have a whole bunch of other things piled on top that you have to deal with.
Yeah,
like,
think about how many emails. You just go on vacation for 2 days and you come back and you got 100 more emails a day.
Well, and some of these agencies are dealing with problems and challenges that it's not just backlog, but it's if an agency is dealing with disease, if an agency is dealing with a variety of other things, these aren't things that wait for the budget to start up. If somebody's doing research on animals, it's not like those animals quit walking around just because the paychecks weren't coming in. So there's a challenge when you have this kind of a window where nobody's allowed to deal with some of that stuff, even if it's not, security related, even if it's not, has to do with necessarily human health, it's still going to be a problem for the efficacy of the program.
I want to point out something. This is it's on topic, but slightly tangential. One of the essential government functions during this shutdown is paying for the maintenance and care of the 45,000 wild horses.
See, it all comes back around to the cavalry.
Well, what
back
I'm saying
to the Civil War.
If you go back to one of our prior podcasts and we talked about the Wild Horses and Free Ranging Burros Act, and we talked about that program and the number of horses that are taken off of BLM and Forest Service land and put into these holding facilities, they have to be cared for, and they have to be cared for to the tune of a very significant dollar amount, right? That's considered keeping those, and for obvious reasons, humane care of animals, it makes sense that it becomes a necessary function. But when you think about that, and you think about that program, and if you, is over the long term, is the way we're operating that program, are we doing it the right way? Should we be thinking about changes?
Please go listen to our previous episodes.
Listen to the previous episodes, right?
On both wild horses and
that. But my point is, then you look at the amount of money being spent there during the shutdown, and then you look at all of the problems that are occurring in national parks right now because we don't have even a fraction of that money to be able to pay for basic sanitation to keep the park clean, right? And to keep people from driving off road and camping where they're not supposed to camp and leaving human waste alongside the road, all that sort of stuff. I don't know. I think it's worth just pointing that out because we talked about the issues of that horse program in the prior episodes, and
well,
and the money's allocated different places. I get that.
It illustrates how we make decisions,
but we've made choices, and this is how it's
and the consequences that flow from that.
Mm-hmm. Anything else you guys want to touch on?
I did remember Nephi was 1884 for the Anti-Deficiency Act.
It just came right to your mind.
It came right to me. I was getting confused because I knew there were significant amendments in 1950, and so I was thinking it was 1950, and when he said Civil War, that kind of threw me off. But
I'm sorry.
It's okay.
We all make mistakes, Mike.
All right.
But I can't be disbarred for mine. Just so the difference between you and me. You get in real trouble. I just say, "Whoops."
Well, let's. Mike and I always put an asterisk on this show, right? You should not rely upon anything we say on this podcast for legal advice.
No.
Anyway, anything else? Anything else that you wanted to cover on this topic?
I think
where do we go from here?
Yeah, I think it will be interesting to see how this gets resolved, when it gets resolved, and then it won't be over as soon as they come to a signing of the final document. As we mentioned, there's going to be a lot of things that when folks come back to work, they're going to have to catch up on, and that's more than just empty the trash cans.
So some of these what right now are 17-day delays for permits, for example, or 17-day delays on maintenance in parks could turn out to be significantly longer than that, even if the shutdown were to end tomorrow.
Right. Yeah, it can be, compounding.
Yeah, and so funding those pieces of the government doesn't mean we're out of the woods on being back on track and smooth sailing. This is going to be a process. There are consequences to every action, and this partial shutdown has some consequences.
Well, the good news is when the shutdown is over, your TSA agents will be significantly happier at work.
I just got back, traveled from traveling, and they were actually, I was pleasantly surprised. They were very personable, very happy. I still think, some people have different experiences with TSA. My experience was very good.
It's because you don't carry any luggage at all. You have like a stick with one of those handkerchiefs like tied behind it, full of nothing but fruit.
I have a backpack I take with me when I travel, and I noticed this time the the band finally broke, so I could only carry it one strap.
Mhm.
On
Now
one
it's
strap.
much trendier.
Didn't stop you though.
Yeah, no, I still.
You're going to take that on the next
I
trip. aren't
probably.
You just cut that one strap off. Dead weight.
Yeah,
It's a messenger
a little
bag.
bit lighter now. Yeah, and my rolling carrier, the handle's broken, and so anybody out there that
There's no
wants to,
wheels. It's like it's
Yeah.
called a rolling carrier, but in reality, it's
anybody
more
out
like
there that wants to donate to the Rescue
yeah,
Me
it's
Fund.
a lot more like a box now.
But I did have a
With a zipper
very
on it.
pleasant experience, and so I do want to thank those federal employees that are out there working every day and not getting paid right now and not knowing when they're going to get paid and still doing it with a smile and a passion for what they do. Boy, I have just the utmost respect for all those folks that are doing it, and I'm really sorry to see all of you going through this right now. I hope this comes to an end soon. I hope, and we should point out, I hope you get back pay.
Not
But
required,
it's not required.
by tradition they get it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that I want to piggyback on what you said. Say, hey, we need to remember these people. Like sometimes we lose sight of the fact that the people involved again. There's people involved with this, and unfortunately, these people, in many cases, federal employees, as much as some people like to kick them, a lot of employees that work for government are people that make sacrifices. They don't make as much money as they might make in the private sector. And they do these jobs, and many of them say, well, I have, there's security, involved in these jobs. They're in, other benefits that, and how they feel about the job, things like that make them do them. If we don't care about those people and take care of them, the best ones, we're going to lose them.
Yeah.
They'll go to some place where they don't feel like they get, demonized or kicked around and things like that. And
They're not political bargaining chips.
Man, these people.
Man.
Too many of them are too important.
We all know a lot of federal employees. We've got friends that are federal employees.
Work with them.
We work with them every single day, and sometimes we agree on things, sometimes we disagree on things. But I always have just the absolute utmost respect for what they do and the service that they provide to the country, and. It's a shame that it's come to this. I hope it gets resolved soon, for the sake of those employees, for the sake of our natural resources. Let's just hope this gets resolved soon. And in the meantime, while we're waiting for that to get resolved, just remember that life's about experiences, so go have one.